In 1978, a quiet suburban town was shaken by an unthinkable crime that reshaped modern horror storytelling. A 6-year-old boy picked up a kitchen knife on Halloween night and committed an act of unbelievable violence. He was locked away in a high-security hospital, treated not as a sick human, but as a force of nature. 15 years later, he escaped into the darkness to return home. What was the hidden truth behind the mind of Michael Myers, and how did a simple low-budget film build an unstoppable media empire? The story begins in the fictional town of Haddonfield, Illinois. On October 31, 1963, young Michael Myers shocked his small community by ending the life of his older sister, Judith. There was no clear motive, no warning sign, and no sudden argument. The crime was cold, calculated, and completely silent. Authorities immediately sent the young boy to Smith's Grove Sanitarium, placing him under the care of a dedicated psychiatrist named Dr. Samuel Loomis. For 15 long years, Dr. Loomis watched the boy closely, hoping to find a path toward healing or at least an explanation. Instead, he found only a vacant, emotionless stare. Dr. Loomis eventually came to a terrifying conclusion. He realized that behind those hollow eyes lay no human emotion, no regret, and no logical thought process. He described the boy as purely evil, a person driven by a silent, predatory instinct. In October 1978, while being transferred for a court hearing, the 21-year-old Michael escaped during a rainstorm. He stole a car and headed straight back to his childhood home. Reaching Haddonfield, he acquired a simple mechanic jumpsuit and a pale white mask, becoming a shadowy figure known simply as the Shape. That night, Michael began targeting high school student Laurie Strode and her friends. Moving like a phantom, he used the shadows of the suburbs to hide in plain sight. He did not run, he did not speak, and he showed no fear of pain. As the night unfolded, Dr. Loomis desperately searched the neighborhood, warning local police that the dangerous escapee was not an ordinary man. The climax of that fateful night ended with Dr. Loomis shooting Michael multiple times, causing him to fall from a second-story balcony. But when Loomis looked down over the edge, the body was completely gone, leaving only an empty lawn and the sound of heavy breathing. This simple, haunting ending established a massive narrative framework that would span decades. Audiences were left wondering how a human being could survive such injuries and disappear so easily into the night. It set up a riddle that future filmmakers and storytellers would spend years trying to answer, expanding the mysterious origins of Haddonfield into a complex web of sequels, alternate timelines, and deep psychological questions. The story of Michael Myers did not stop on that cold October night in 1978. As the years passed, the filmmakers faced a massive problem. How do you explain a character who seems impossible to kill? In the original sequel, the narrative picked up immediately where the first film left off. Laurie Strode was rushed to Haddonfield Memorial Hospital, while Dr. Loomis continued his desperate hunt through the dark streets. It was during this long night that a major secret was revealed. Laurie Strode was actually Michael's younger sister, who had been adopted after the tragedy of 1963. This revelation changed the entire direction of the franchise. Michael was no longer just a random force picking victims at strangers' houses. He was now driven by a dark family connection. His mission was to erase every last member of his bloodline. But as the movie series grew through the late 1980s and 1990s, the story turned into something even stranger. The creators wanted a deeper, almost mystical explanation for why Michael possessed such unreal strength and couldn't be destroyed by bullets or fire. This led to the creation of the Thorn storyline. In this version of the history, ancient rituals were introduced into the lore. It was suggested that a hidden cult, known as the Cult of Thorn, had placed an ancient curse on young Michael when he was just a child. According to this dark myth, the curse forced one chosen person in a tribe to sacrifice their entire family on Halloween night to save the rest of the community from sickness and drought. Michael was simply a puppet, controlled by a strange symbol carved into his skin and driven by an ancient magic that took away his humanity. For many fans, this supernatural explanation turned the series into a complex global power mystery. It moved the villain away from being a simple human psychopath and turned him into a tool used by a secretive, shadow organization operating behind the scenes in Haddonfield. Dr. Loomis spent years tracking down the secrets of this cult, discovering that powerful figures in the town were secretly protecting Michael to preserve their own unnatural order. Eventually, this storyline became so detailed and confusing that future creators decided to wipe the slate clean. They realized that explaining too much of the mystery actually took away from the fear. The tension faded when Michael became a tool for an organized cult instead of an unpredictable force. This struggle between real-world psychology and dark fantasy created multiple split timelines across 40 years of cinema, leaving scholars and fans debating what was real and what was myth. If this story is opening your eyes, make sure to subscribe. Because what comes next changes everything. To truly understand the legend of Michael Myers, we have to look past the supernatural myths and look at the real human science of fear. When the original story was created, it tapped into a very real psychological concept, the fear of the silent predator. Most violent crimes in the real world have a clear motive, like money, revenge, or anger. But Michael Myers operates completely outside of those rules. He does not speak, he does not show anger, and he does not leave behind any emotional clues. In behavioral science, this total lack of emotion is often called a complete absence of affect. Psychiatrists in the films, especially Dr. Loomis, struggle to classify him using normal medical terms. He was not simply a patient with a mental illness. He seemed to lack the basic wiring that makes someone human. He showed no response to physical pain, no fear when shot, and no pleasure after committing violent acts. He moved with a slow, deliberate pace, like a biological machine operating on a simple, unbreakable program. This psychological design is what makes the character so terrifying to audiences around the world. Humans are hardwired by evolution to look at faces to read emotions and predict danger. When someone hides behind a blank, featureless white mask, our brains cannot read their intentions. The mask acts like a mirror, reflecting our own worst fears back at us while giving away nothing about what the person behind it is thinking. Scientists and film historians have long studied why this simple visual trick works so well. The original mask was actually a cheap plastic mask of actor William Shatner, painted white with the eye holes widened. By removing all the human features and paint, the mask became a blank slate. It turned a regular human face into a cold, lifeless void. When combined with heavy shadows and long periods of absolute silence, it created a blueprint for movie villains that is still studied in film schools today. This careful mix of human movement and non-human behavior creates a strange discomfort in the viewer. It forces us to ask a deeply uncomfortable question about human nature itself. Is a person born as a blank slate, or can pure, unexplainable darkness exist inside a human child from the moment they take their first breath? As researchers examined his history, they realized that the answer to this question was even more complicated than anyone expected. As the decades rolled on, the story of Michael Myers became one of the most fractured narratives in modern cinema history. Hollywood tried multiple times to restart, rebuild, and reshape the timeline to bring the audience back to the core elements of the original 1978 vision. In 1998, the filmmakers decided to ignore every sequel after the second movie. They erased the ancient curse, erased the secret cults, and focused entirely on the trauma of Laurie Strode 20 years after her first horrific encounter in Haddonfield. Then came the bold reboot directed by Rob Zombie in 2007. This version tried to explain the unexplainable by grounding Michael in realistic human psychology and a troubled childhood background. Instead of a mysterious force born into a quiet, normal home, viewers saw a young boy growing up in a deeply broken environment. It offered a realistic, gritty look at how severe trauma, abuse, and mental collapse could create a real-life killer. While it was a fascinating scientific and psychological experiment, many longtime fans felt that explaining his childhood made him feel less like a mysterious legend and more like a standard true crime case study. By 2018, the creators made their most dramatic decision yet. They decided to wipe away every single sequel from the official history books. In this new timeline, Michael Myers was not Laurie Strode's brother at all. He had no magical curse, no secret family connections, and no hidden cult protecting him. He was simply an old, dangerous man who had sat in a state hospital in total silence for 40 years after being arrested on that fateful night in 1978. This major change reset the entire stakes of the story. By removing the family connection, his actions became completely random again. He was not hunting a specific person because of shared blood. He was simply moving through the world like a storm, destroying anything in his path without reason or emotion. This restored the chilling atmosphere of the original film, turning the town of Haddonfield back into a battleground where ordinary people faced an unpredictable threat. This endless cycle of rewriting history shows how difficult it is to balance grounded reality with legendary storytelling. Every time the writers tried to explain his powers through hidden science, ancient magic, or childhood trauma, the audience wanted to return to the simple, terrifying truth of an unstoppable shadow. But as this new trilogy proved, even when you stripped away all the modern myths, one massive scientific question still remained unanswered. If these hidden turns in cinema history are fascinating to you, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. What comes next uncovers the ultimate truth behind the mask. When you look closely at the physical feats performed by Michael Myers across his history, you enter a fascinating territory where biology meets urban legend. In the movies, he survives being shot at close range, falls from massive heights, withstands severe fires, and suffers injuries that would instantly disable any normal human being. Yet he continues to walk forward without slowing down, showing no visible sign of physical pain or shock. Is there any real-world science that could explain how a living person could endure such massive trauma? In modern medical science, there are extremely rare conditions related to how the brain processes pain. One known condition is called congenital insensitivity to pain. People born with this condition can suffer severe physical damage without feeling the warning signals that normally tell the brain to stop. They can walk on broken limbs or sustain major tissue damage while remaining completely calm. However, while this explains the lack of physical reaction to pain, it does not explain how a body can physically survive structural damage that would cause lethal blood loss or organ failure. Another scientific area worth examining is the massive release of adrenaline and the human stress response during extreme survival events. Under high stress, the human body can temporarily ignore horrific injuries, shut down non-essential functions, and push physical muscles past their normal limits. This is often called superhuman strength, seen when parents lift cars off trapped children. But this state only lasts for a few minutes before the body collapses from total exhaustion and cellular failure. Michael Myers operates in this extreme physical state for hours, or even days, without resting or eating. This leads scientists and medical researchers who analyze film lore to a surprising conclusion. His endurance cannot be explained by regular human biology alone. Instead, his physical body seems to act like a biological shell driven by an overwhelming biological drive to survive at all costs. His muscles, nerves, and organs appear to operate under a continuous repair loop, ignoring severe damage that would normally cause systemic shock. By treating his body as an extreme case study, the series pushes us to think about the physical limits of human survival. It asks whether the mind, driven by a single intense focus, can override the natural biological shutdowns built into our DNA. And as the story moves toward its final modern chapter, this clash between human fragility and a relentless physical force brings the entire town of Haddonfield to the brink of total collapse. In the final modern trilogy, the focus shifted from a single killer to the deep psychological infection spreading across an entire city. Haddonfield was no longer just a peaceful background setting. It had become a town suffering from collective trauma, paranoia, and fear. When a community spends 40 years looking over its shoulder, expecting a phantom to emerge from the dark, the fabric of society begins to tear apart. People stopped trusting their neighbors, mob rule took over the streets, and fear itself became more destructive than the man behind the white mask. This social collapse highlights a powerful truth about human nature. Extreme trauma does not just affect the direct victims. It ripples through generations, changing how children are raised, how local governments operate, and how everyday people respond to panic. By the time the final confrontation arrived, the citizens of Haddonfield realized that in their desperate attempt to destroy an unstoppable force, they had allowed fear to turn them into something unrecognizable. The physical battle was no longer just about stopping one man, it was about reclaiming the town's lost humanity. When we look back across nearly half a century of storytelling, the history of Michael Myers is far more than a simple collection of horror films. It is a long-running cultural experiment that tested the limits of cinema, psychology, and narrative structure. From a low-budget independent film in 1978 to a global media franchise spanning multiple timelines, the story constantly adapted to reflect our changing fears about safety, science, and the unknown forces hiding in the quiet corners of the world. Whether viewed as a silent human predator, a victim of ancient curses, or a biological anomaly that defies physical laws, the character remains one of the most recognizable icons in modern pop culture. He stands as a reminder of our deepest primal fear, that despite all our technology, science, and modern security, there are some mysteries that refuse to be explained, and some shadows that can never be fully erased. As the lights fade on the quiet streets of Haddonfield, one final question lingers in the minds of scholars and audiences alike. When we look into the dark, are we truly afraid of the monster hiding in the shadows, or are we afraid of what the fear itself reveals about us? If this complete journey into the history of cinema's most terrifying mystery kept you hooked, share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more deep investigative breakdowns.